Everyone joining. Just giving it a few minutes for everyone to get in and get in with us. Everyone. While we wait for everyone to join, if you want to say in the chat where you're joining us from, love that. Oh. All right. I will start this program. Thank you everyone who is joining us and welcome to Artist Voices Holding Ground. This is a virtual panel where we're featuring some of the artists that we have in the exhibition going on at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and I want to thank you all for joining us. This program is being card captioned by Candace Martin from Joyful Signing, and we're doing this to make sure that this program is as accessible as possible. And if you do need those captions, you can toggle your screen to be able to click on captions to be able to see it, because sometimes it doesn't come up right away. So make sure you click captions to be able to see the captions. Uh, my name is Elizabeth Ajunwa, and I am the director of the Betty Boyd Dettre Library and Research Center. And I just want to give you all a little bit about the library. We have 30,000 print and book resource materials. And when those materials, we have notable special collections, such as letters written by and to Frida Kahlo. We have some early editions and rare books, some written by Virginia Woolf and other notable authors, as well as a wonderful artist book collection. And with that artist book collection, we wanted to celebrate that with the exhibition Holding Ground. Holding Ground Artist Books for the National Museum of Women in the Arts was curated by my predecessor and just all around great person, Lenora Williams. And this exhibition was made possible through the generous bequest by Marjorie B. Racklin. So that's the spiel. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful panelists. We have Alisa Banks, uh, Julie Chen, Suzanne Coley, and Maricarmen Solis, and they're going to talk more about their work, and then we will have a more robust discussion on their art practice. And I think we're going to start with Alisa and your work, History of a People.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I just wrote a little bit. I'm here in Dallas, Texas, and I primarily work in books and textiles. And I'll just go over this piece just a bit. I wrote something down so I could keep myself in check. History of a People. This book traces the roots and development of African American culture. The book consists of 6 bottles or chapters of scents that correspond to the cultural landscape of periods in history: roots, journey, arrival, hero, protest, and visioning. Materials such as indigo, cowrie, and hair were selected for their cultural significance. The overall form of the book is based on African architecture and tribal crowns, with the thought of their continued evolution over time and distance, as well as Minkisi, protective objects containing spiritually charged substances. The shape of the cover panel is loosely based on the schematic of the Brooks slave ship. The beading at the base of the cover represents sand and beach, farewell and unwelcome, the last and first views of the middle passage, as well as the ocean floor and the many ancestors that remain there. The bird symbol is the sankafa, meaning go and get it, encouraging the viewer to look to the past for future guidance. Inside the base are incantations that are not accessible to the viewer, symbolizing knowledge and histories lost. The sense or interpretations of events and materials encountered during specific time frames, such as salt and water for the Middle Passage and smoke and sugar for the period of enslavement. Some aromatics are more abstract, such as the smell of containment in Journey and the air in Visioning. Can we get to the next slide, please? Thank you. The aromatics exist as rememory, faded but lingering throughout time. The scent profiles for the chapters include, for roots, plants, wet earth, and ambergris. For journey, water, metal, and containment. For arrival, salt, water, iron, and blood. For harrow, fieldwork, sugar, burning wood, and iron. For protest, smoke, food, metal, and sweat. And for visioning, air, traces of water and earth, and flight. The doors are portals in the base of the book announce chapter headings, and when opened, reveal recesses that contain panels of beaded adinkra symbols, a system of icons that communicate proverbs or history. The icons mean the following. For roots, the first chapter, it's the soul. And for journey, the icon means farewell. For arrival, the icon is adaptability. For harrow, it means that which cannot be burnt. For protest, the icon means bravery and valor. And finally, for visioning, the icon is the rising sun, which means warmth, hope, and strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
So, hello, everybody. The book that I made for the show is called Many Hands. And I really wanted to focus on honoring women artists and also women who have been really inspirational to me in my own art practice. And so I really wanted there to be a focus on hand imagery and also to have the reader's hands interact with images of hands of the artists. And so I decided to create this structure that's called a rotating ring flexagon that you can't really see it in a still image, but you pick up this ring and hold it in your hands, and as you twist it, you can read the text and see the imagery on all sides. And then next slide, please. And then in the middle of the box, there's a little box in the middle of the ring that has a smaller book called the Book of Hands, and this book has portraits of women artists and women from my life that have, inspired me and have contributed to the field of book art specifically, but also art in general. And then underneath the Book of Hands is a little well that you can see on that image to the right, and it's contains castings of my own hands that are holding a necklace. And the necklace is a beaded necklace that I designed, but that was fabricated by a collective of women beaders in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. They're known as Marigold Bead. And the necklace has a quote from Georgia O'Keeffe woven into it in text. And it says, I think there is something unexplored about woman that only a woman can explore. And so having the opportunity to make this book for the show really encouraged me and gave me the opportunity to focus on thinking about women in the arts and how I wanted to explore that through an artist's book.
Suzanne?
Hi, everyone. The title of my book is In Bloom, and it features the text of Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, perhaps the most famous one of all, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? I start with a rather docile, rectangular container, a vessel that is so dependent on the reader, and I seek to awaken it from that dormant state, to make it come alive and participate in the action of how it is read. I look for ways to create a dialogue between the imagery and the poem so that the reader can interpret and interact and engage and at some point become part of that conversation. When working with poetry, each poem sets the framework and provides the guideline of how I should proceed. Each poem becomes the boss, the client of the work. The poem's words, theme, tone, subject, and structure, all of these parts become the client of the new work. Combining Shakespeare's sonnets with meticulously sewn historical and contemporary textiles creates a new type of poetic vernacular, one that is concurrently visual and literary, one which offers not just Black text on white pages, but a colorful arrangement of meaning, symbolism, and expression. These books become emotional experiences in which cultural symbols, designs, and techniques are combined with 400-year-old poems that are reanalyzed based on their content. As a full-time artist, I select literature that stirs the soul and compels me emotionally. I don't want to paint portraits and landscapes. I want to shine a light on the shadows of meaning. I want to paint pity, draw revenge, illustrate anger, design joy, deconstruct disappointment, sow betrayal, use old and new printing technologies to depict belief, trust, loss, and destruction in order to make an already complex text richer. The book form, with its intimate, tactile nature, allows for this. I make textile books with care, passion, and attention to detail because I want other people to experience some of the emotions and questions that compelled me to make them in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Maricarmen Solis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maricarmen Solis. So my book was actually inspired by the building itself. I hadn't had the pleasure of visiting the museum before this exhibition. So I was really excited to kind of represent the building and the architecture along with everything inside. So my hope for this project was to kind of translate that experience of visiting the museum for the first time, since I wasn't able to do that before. This is a great time to kind of give that walkthrough to someone who hadn't been there. I made a hinge box. You can go to the next slide. I made a hinge box to represent the building, and then inside I decided to choose kind of a myriad of pictures of photographs of paintings that you could find in the museum. So yeah, I just wanted to represent the museum, and then that pink background and everything you see inside, even though it's not an exact replica, I wanted it to be kind of symbolic of that experience.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing more about your work. We're going to jump into discussion time and take the visual aids off and just show our faces, our wonderful faces. I want to thank you all again, and then I also want to shout out Addie Gayoso. She is assisting us with tech today and is a wonderful member of our education department. So just want to shout Addie out before we move on. And yeah, let's jump into the questions that I know I shared with you all ahead of time. And the first question that I have is there a ritual or routine you do when you are about to create a work? And I wanted to start with you, Alisa, because your work is so, I feel like there's a lot of rituals that are already embedded into your work. So I'd love for you to start us off with this question.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, I told on myself. Well, the first thing I do most days when I come into my studio, I have prepared my to-do list from the day before. And so I just kind of look it over. Then I kind of open up my blinds and sweep the floor. And I've started recently doing like a little meditation or movement, a little exercise, and then I generally get started. So, and I may or may not have music on. It just depends on what the task is. If I'm writing, it's quiet. But if I'm doing maybe kind of rote activities, then I might have some music or something on.
So, so that means you're going to share the playlist with all of us.
Well, I don't have one, but I'd be happy to share something.
Anyone else on this question?
Well, I just want to say, we all know what we do when we are creative, but what do we do when we're stuck? You know, what do we do when we can't figure out, you know, what's the next step, or how do we fix this problem, or if an experimentation isn't going well? So what I do is I take a 6 foot by 6 piece of canvas, or an 8 feet by 8 feet piece of canvas, and I just start painting. I take 5 colors and I do this abstract type of painting technique where I get all my emotions and my thoughts out there and I leave it there. And then it really frees me up to do whatever I wanted to do. It just clears my mind.
I think that's a great idea to just like have this activity that you do when you're stuck. And I think that's a great way of approaching the question. So for me, I'm sort of in between the two of you where I teach full time. So I have just my calendar is like full of meetings and classes and everything. So, and I always have several projects sort of on the back burner at the same time, but I know that I'm going to get serious about a project when it starts to get on the calendar. So I put, when I'm ready to start working on a project, seriously, I'll put it on my calendar. It's sort of like I'm making an appointment with myself, and I will go to that appointment, even if I don't have anything to do. It's like, well, this is your time. It's on the calendar. If you're just going to sit here quietly and not do anything, okay, that's how you're going to use your time, but you're not going to give it away. And so that's sort of, you know, allows me to then, okay, I can either sit here or I can play or start doing something. So that's sort of how I make sure that I'm getting somewhere with a project for real, is, you know, when it gets on the calendar.
That's great.
I think for me, I do a lot of research, which is like not specifically like looking things up, but kind of research of inspiration throughout my own work, like going back and seeing things I've done, not necessarily looking for it to be similar, but just to kind of get in that like groove of like, this is what I've made, this is what I'm capable of making, and like I can make something else, you know. And I also listen to a lot of music, and I do have playlists, so we can share playlists.
I love to hear this because a non-artist in the group and art librarian more so, it's great to hear that there's similar processes that we use to get through what we're working on. I know with me and my friends now, it's like if it's not on the calendar, it's not happening. So I love to hear that that's a similar process. And I'm so excited about these potential playlist that we I think. Um, to go into that, the next question, I think this is a really good segue from what you said, Maricarmen, of what this question is, what kind of ideas or concepts inspire you in your art making practice? And if you don't mind, picking up where you kind of left off and what inspires you.
Yes. So I'm typically in my art practice, I'm typically inspired by my own culture and my family, and that tends to kind of come out through my art, even though it's not the intended purpose every time, but it always shows up kind of on accident, in a happy accident. So I kind of use that research idea that I can look up things about my own culture. Like, for example, I'm a Chicana, so I obviously don't know everything about being a Chicana. So when I do want to find out more and kind of use that within my work, I kind of have to do some more research just to make sure I'm representing it correctly, as well as in my or out of my art practice, I do try to do research on art accessibility. So that's another way that kind of inspires what I do as an artist.
Awesome. Anyone else? What are your um, things that inspire you? I mean, Suzanne, I know Shakespeare is a big inspiration in a lot of the work that you're doing. Would you like to speak more to that?
About Shakespeare? Oh, the sonnets. I don't even know where to begin with that. I think that's a whole nother episode, my Shakespeare sonnet and working on Measure for Measure in the plays. Just inspired by 400-year-old words and using them as an African American woman and the types of books that I make. And I guess this will go into another question, but the type of books that I make, I mean, I grew up around people making textile books. And this is not a widely known story that in the African American community where I'm from, usually one woman or a group of women were giving clothes of a person who had died and transformed these clothing into precious keepsakes, fabric books, memories of life. And it was a spiritual process for the maker and for the deceased person's family. And this practice was born out of exclusion in cemeteries and funeral parlors and print shops. So I'm really inspired by those stories. And for me, not much has changed. I mean, I have yet to find a print shop to allow me to work independently on my projects, not for lack of trying, but just that I wasn't allowed to be in there. And Shakespeare has allowed me to use these poems that weren't accessible, I didn't have access to as a kid, and really delve deep into them and use this type of exclusion from making books, making art that was part of my community, or even reading and writing. So it's kind of this convergence of literature and fashion that I'm trying to commemorate. And Shakespeare, because those words are so powerful and everyone knows Shakespeare. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I really love
I
that.
mean, and these books, I mean, I'm so happy that I inherited this. So I've been making these books for 56 years, but they weren't considered art. So what you see in your museum now, we've been doing, but it wasn't considered art. And so I don't know, just something powerful about that. And being a woman, a Black woman, and creating this with a male's text. And being a scholar at the Folger Shakespeare Library too. So it's just, I don't even know what to say. Just the convergence of 400 years of this enslavement and this lack of inclusion. And now finally, thank you. And, everything is coming to light now.
Yeah, I love you sharing that because I feel one of the things when I give tours of the exhibition I talk about is all of the works in in this exhibition show the intimate reasons why women are making art, and I just feel like you really touch on that point. All of your works do, but I really appreciate you sharing that. And I want to highlight a comment in the chat. Um, from Lenora. And she says, in another conversation, Holding Ground artist Colette Fu says she generally avoids using text in her work. We've heard how important the work of poets is to Suzanne. How would you all describe your relationship to word and text? So there's a question in there, so I hope you all don't mind us throwing a curveball. But any thoughts on that? Word and text in your artist books?
For me, text is really important. And I once had a prompt to do a book. Well, I had two different prompts. One was to make a book without imagery, and I was able to do that, no problem. And then I got another prompt like the following year to make a book with no text, and I could not do it. I had to like add words, and I didn't realize how important words were to me until I got that prompt. And I know that it's very possible to make really meaningful books without words, but I couldn't do it. So writing is a really important part of my practice, because I almost exclusively use my own writing in my books. I do a lot of research, sort of like Maricarmen said that she does to start with the process, but then I'm always sort of filtering it through my own thought process and my own understanding of the world, and then writing not a scholarly text, but more of a poetic response to all the research that I do. But yeah, words are definitely a key component of my books.
I have to agree with that statement that words are really important to my work as well. Even though I have made books that didn't have text in them, but even with the ones that I didn't have text, I still wrote something about them before, during, while creating them, just so, first of all, I can get to the core of why I'm making this piece and keep that string going through it. And when text appears in my work, it's generally text that I've written myself, but most of it is research-based, either an archive and other research materials, but they're generally my words as well.
Yeah, I think I don't always use text in my work, but when I do it, it definitely needs to be kind of a powerful part of it. Like it needs to really create context for the piece. And then if I don't use text, it's definitely all about the title. Like I try to create that title. Like I spend some time trying to think like, how can I not necessarily describe my work in the title, but make sure that there's a very distinct like connection. There's a very specific connection to the work that I'm making.
I would just like to say something about text and books. These are books made with paper. It's very difficult to print on textiles. So normally you have to sew the text or you have to silkscreen the text. So back in the day with the African American books, I mean, there were no text, or if there was text, it was sewn. So that's where this needlework became very important, and it was very subversive because they weren't supposed to read and write. So I have this relationship with text, putting it on textiles in a very different manner. Not with letterpress, not with your traditional ways of putting text on textiles. And I think that is something I would like to see more of, or in conversation more of, is the way textile books are going and the way books that are printed with paper are going.
That's really interesting. I hope I can join in, just butt in there. But I'm not familiar with the history that you're referring to, Suzanne, which I find it fascinating. I definitely want to learn more about that. But for me, I think about the ways in which ancestors didn't have text, it wasn't accessible, at least not in the open. And what ways were history passed on? Because when I was in school years ago, it was pretty much, there was no history, right? You didn't have a history, but we all lived something different. And how were histories passed on? And so I like to think about, as a person who loves books, how can that book be in conversation with how my ancestors were? And so that's why I'm really drawn to the sculptural aspects of books, and including textiles. But that history that you're referring to is really interesting. I'd like to know more about that.
It always begins with birth, marriage, and death. somewhere, you know, that's where we find the histories of these things, and mainly death. I mean, I hate to say it, but cemeteries and where are people buried, and how do they commemorate the dead? What do they use? And how do they celebrate this life? And not much is written. You're right. It's not written because they couldn't write about it, because then they would show that they could read and write, which was very risky at the time. So it was passed down through the seamstresses, and kept very quiet, like how I found out, like as a kid, only because my family was in the textile industry. And again, it was not art. It was just something you did in the household, and you gave it to the mother or the father. It wasn't yeah, it was very private.
Hmm.
I want to touch on everyone's art process for the books that they created in this exhibition. Um, but I want to make sure I remember the points that you all are making, because it relates very much to the next questions we have coming up. And I see some question in the chat. We will have time for Q&A at the end of this, so we'll get to your questions, so don't worry. But this next question is again focusing more on what was each of your process to get the pieces we now see in the exhibition and that you've shown all of us? How did we get there? And I'd love to start with you, Julie, because your work has so many pieces and elements to it. So if you don't mind starting us off.
Sure. I started by doing research about the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And so I went to the Kohler Art Library, which is here in Madison, part of our school, my school. And I was able to check out a couple of books specifically about the museum. And so I spent a lot of time just reading about the history of the museum and thinking about what the museum, why it was founded, how it was founded, and what it does, what it's done through history and today. And that really helped me get closer to where I ended up with the book, which is thinking about the work of women and thinking about how I wanted to somehow take this research and bring it back into the artist book. And I decided that I really wanted to focus on hands and images of hands. And so then my research took me into, looking at portraits and looking at hands and looking at how hands have been portrayed. But then I'm a letterpress printer. That's my main medium. And so then I'm thinking about ways in which to translate those images into a form that I can print. And so that the processes that I use really inform the direction that the work takes. And then the little book that's in with the ring is reso printed. So there's a type of printing that you use a duplicating machine. It kind of looks like a copier, but it's sort of like if a silkscreen machine or a silkscreen setup and a copier had a baby, it would be the risograph. So you get to use specific colors, but I translated those images for the Riso from letterpress. So I'm coming at Riso from a different direction than a lot of other artists who use Riso as their main medium. And then for the necklace, it just so happened that I had taken a trip to South Africa right around the time that I got the invitation to be in this show. I got my invitation late because I had moved and the letter got lost in the mail. And then I finally got it and I was like, yes, of course I want to do it. And so I'm doing this research and I'm thinking about the piece. And I had met, a woman who represents this collective. I was in South Africa and the collective is in Zimbabwe, but I decided, what if I was able to include a piece of jewelry with the book that was fabricated by women. And so then that whole idea of how to, doing research on what text I could put on the necklace, because I knew it had to be text-based. So it all came together from, that invitation to do a book that was somehow for the museum and maybe about the museum. So the text on my book is about the activity of the museum, even though it doesn't specifically name the museum, but it's really kind of, inspired by what I learned about what the museum does.
Anyone else with thoughts? Thank you, Julie. Your work really is, when I talk about it, it's a repository, showing that NMWA is a repository for women artists. So it's great to hear that that's what was in your process as well. If no one has anything to add on this particular question, I do want to jump to the next one because this one is a bit more so philosophical maybe. And that's, how has this exhibition changed or affected your life in any way? Has there been any developments as a result of participation in this exhibition? I want to point back to Alisa because you've had some specific things happen with your book, but if anyone else wants to share.
Well, I'll talk about it.
Oh, that's okay.
So this book actually is something that I had been thinking about for a really long time, but it just wasn't the right time for it to come into being until I received the invitation. I had been to the museum probably shortly after it opened in mid 80s, I think it was. That was my only time visiting. And so I kind of had an idea of some of the work that was in the museum, at least at that time. And I also have a book about artist books that the museum put out a few years ago as well. And I went back and forth briefly about, should I try this project or should I do something that relates more to the reopening of the museum? But I remembered that the museum had work that wasn't shown in other places, work by women that wouldn't be shown at other places. And I thought, well, this is an epic story and it's about a culture and it's usually men's voices. And so I decided to go on with that project. But since then, I wrote more deeply about the project itself as well as the sense in the project, and had a couple of articles published or essays published about the scent part of it. And I also made a standard, what I call a standard edition. So with artist books, sometimes you'll have one that's, maybe more detailed or has different types of materials in it. That particular one of the museums is the only one. I call it the unique edition. And then I made another edition, a smaller one using some different materials. And that one, I'm happy to say that it was a finalist for the Minnesota Book Art Prize. So I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. But anyway, so it pushed me to do more than just finish that one piece and then move on, which is what I normally do. Because I thought about it for so long, there were different aspects, and I still have a couple more things I want to do with that whole series. So anyway, thanks for the invite. It actually pushed me to move forward.
Alisa, how long did it take you to make your book?
The unique book, it took about a year to do that. But as I said, I'd written about it and thought about it for probably 2 or 3 years before then.
And then the edition, how long did it take you to make that? And what is the number?
My editions are very small. It's an edition of 10, and I'm not sure how long it took me to do it. I want to say maybe most of the next year. It took me to do those because it's mostly handwork. First of all, figuring out the form took a bit, and then it's handwork as well. So the scents are the same and some of the materials are the same, but they're put together differently.
That's a good question for everyone. I'm just curious, how long did it take everyone to make their respective works? Suzanne, how long did yours take?
Well, I'm pretty lucky. When I got the invitation, I've known about the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and I've always admired your library since Lenora. I love Lenora, the former director of the museum, and she was
In the
all,
chat.
oh,
Yeah.
well, hi Lenora. Anyway, Lenora was really always welcoming and opening, and you can go there and do research. So I've known about it. So I've always done women's needlework. So those flowers are made from like recycled women's dresses that have been hand dyed. And I think it takes a lifetime to learn that technique, but I learned it back in the day in New York City, but I really fine-tuned it for the book, because if it's on clothing, I mean, you don't worry so much, about handling it. But with the book, I wanted to make sure that it was archival and it could, withstand being on display for a year. So it took me about 6 months to perfect making those flowers sturdy enough for an exhibition, and also all the pages in there from like women's clothing that have been hand dyed, hand painted. But I've been inspired by Anne Lo, the work of Anne Lo, the African American designer, and Gao Pei from China. These couture fashion houses run by women. So I've always admired their work, and I've always imitated them. So it wasn't a big stretch, but it takes about well, I'm getting faster, but a year. So it takes about 10 years to master that craft. And then once you master it, it doesn't take long to make it.
Julie, Maricarmen, if you want to share.
Yeah, so I feel like I want to say, because I feel like I was doing it on and off, so I don't remember how long it took me, but I think with the process of like researching the museum and like I hand painted the outside cover, so everything would kind of look like a little building. So it took me a couple months to really get it how it is now. Um, and yeah, I feel like back to the question about what was the question? It was
How did it affect your life? Or
how it has affected my life after the exhibition. I've grown a lot of confidence in my book arts practice because I kind of was introduced to it during college. I didn't know too much about the history of book arts, and I was learning about it a little bit. And um, one of my professors actually, my book art professor, introduced me to it, and it completely changed my life. Like I think it's one of the most profound mediums to use in your work, just because of how many details you can include, how it can be very interactive as well. um, and yeah, and I started painting again. I've been out of college for 2 years now, so um, kind of getting out of that studio that I had was really difficult to get back into my practice. But definitely after this exhibition, it's my first exhibition. Um, I'm just so happy to be a part of this group, and I really gained a lot of confidence in my work. So
it's awesome to hear, and you're one of our emerging artists in the collection of artists. And Carrie Macular Keeler. She was your professor, correct?
yes, and she was also part of this exhibition. So I'm really happy I got to do it with her.
And we have, if you do get to see the exhibition before it closes, or if you've seen it, we have their work side by side because of that connection. So, yeah. Julie, did you want to share? Don't have to, not.
So my book is an edition of 30, but so far I've only made maybe 7 of them. So I got, like I said earlier, I got the invitation late because the letter went astray. So I had about 9 months from the time I knew about the exhibition to when I had to send the first copy to the show. And so it was on the calendar, every step of the way, what I had to have done by when. And but I always do editions of about 30, between 25 and 50 copies, and my work tends to be very labor intensive. So the question of how long does it take you is kind of a trick question, because it takes a certain amount of time to get that first copy, but then it could take years to make the rest of the copies. And so I've got one on the table right over there that I'm in the process of putting together. But I've got like a system going, and I'm just trying to finish putting them together, but it's probably going to take a while to get to number 30.
Thank you all for sharing. We have one more question left before we jump into some of the questions in the chat. And if you have any, please leave them in the chat there. But the last question is, thinking of the world of artist bookmaking, what would you like to see change or develop in this art making realm? And I'm just going to open that up for anyone to discuss what they would like to see in the world of book arts.
I'll go. I think Holding Ground exhibit made it clear that the world of book arts is very diverse and nuanced. We see different categories or styles of book art making. What we need is recognition of these nuances. And this is an opportunity for scholars and for museums and for libraries to start establishing outlines of what these different categories are. If we imagine book arts as a world map, right? We don't even know where are the continents and where are the oceans.
I really like that, Suzanne. That's a really great metaphor. I was going to say a similar thing to you, which is that I would like to see more scholarly writing, not just about the history of book art, which there is more and more, but specifically things about theory and concept for the maker. Like so that there's a lot of opportunities for people to learn how to make a structure, or learn how to bind a book, or learn how to print, or learn how to use any number of media that you could make a book with. But there's not as much information about, okay, now that you know how to make a book, what do you do? How do you get that, use all the parts in a way that's really specific to the book and the book form as an art medium. And since I've been teaching for over 30 years, so this is something that I've thought about a lot, and I do hope that there will be more and more writing of this kind to help makers take their work forward. But I really love that idea of the world of book art as a world map. Like what is that? If we think of book art as a map, what do we, how do we define the different parts of it? So that's going to stick with me.
I think I want to see more book arts like programming around me, because I always see, I mean, I've been a part of, since I was like young, been part of like workshops for printmaking and like block printmaking and kind of like a little bit on a smaller scale. But I think it's a really great skill to know how to make structures like this, and how Julie, you were mentioning like bookbinding and all of these things. I think they're very intricate, and I think a lot of people would benefit from just knowing how to do them. So more programming for sure.
I agree that I would like to see more writing about artist books, as well as inclusion in art exhibitions outside of solely artist book exhibitions. I think of artist books, I mean, it's got the word art in it, so, but especially sculptural books, they really bridge the gap. They really bridge sculpture and book. And I don't see why they wouldn't be in art exhibitions, without, as well as artist book exhibitions, to see a variety of books, but on their own, and hold their own in exhibitions, which they certainly could. But I'm in an area, I think artist books, that the artist books genre is really strong along the coasts, and I see less of it on the interior, like where I am. And so I find myself constantly being asked what an artist's book is, even though they've been around for decades, if not longer. And so I'd like to see them be more of a mainstream thing because they're so accessible also. As Maricarmen said, just being able to make a book, for me, it changed everything. And so it would be nice to have more programming on, how to make a book outside of the academic setting.
Mhm.
And different types of books like embroidered bindings, but anyway, I just want to say this about the National Museum of Women in the Arts and what they did for us. Like, they had our books exhibited with major artworks by major women, and that was spectacular and amazing. It felt like we were in conversation with the real art. We weren't just like in a library stuck, in the archives on the research section, but we were there so that everyone could see us and know that a lot of effort and work and thought and rigor went into making this art object, and that it could be read along with these canvases. And actually, it can be read in more ways than some of the canvases because you can turn the page. So
Yeah,
I applaud NMWA for doing that because I've never really seen that anywhere else. So and I think every museum should have an artist book placed in the center of their exhibition to show the work that is done behind the scenes, because I think we are like the true voice of the world. I mean, we're taking like history and we're throwing it in these books, like no one else. It's like so much thought is going into there and so much time, like a year to make your one book. It takes time to make these art objects, and a lot of research and a lot of thought goes in them. And a lot of them are made by women. And I wonder if that's the reason why they're not in these major exhibitions. Like, we should be in the Met also, in the costume, because they're made with textiles.
Yeah, I was really struck by the care in which the exhibition, the books were displayed. The works on the walls were perfect against the works that were in the cases. So I know that took a lot of work and probably a lot of paperwork as well to arrange that. I can only imagine, but I just want to say my work is next to Sonia Clark.
Alma Thomas, Amy Sherrod. I mean, major people, the Gorilla Girls. I mean, just major people in the exhibition with us. We're in conversation with them.
Yeah,
It's so great to hear
fantastic.
that you all are happy that it was done that way. I know Lenora put a lot of work into this. Our curator, Lenora worked with our curatorial department to select the book, the artworks that were in conversation with all of your works. And so that's just really, I'm so happy to hear to hear this. And it's good to know this because, again, when I do tours of the exhibition, I'm always talking about how the works are in conversation and the art making practice that you all put into your works that mirror and match the art that's on the walls. So that's really fantastic. I see so many comments and we won't have time for all of your questions. So I do apologize for that, but I did want to highlight what I could. And I hope that for some of you, some of the answers you've already given have probably answered some of your questions I see in the chat. But I do want to shout out Catherine from Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. They have an amazing artist book collection, and check out their YouTube page because it's really, really fantastic. So so you can see her comment in the chat if you have the time and have the ability, but definitely recommend checking out their collection. And I think we might have time for one question. I see. I'm so sorry. I'm going to read the last question that I see because I think that's what we have time for. And I apologize. We can't get to everyone's questions, but please look at our website. If you are in the DC area, come and see the exhibition before it closes on October 20th. And, thank you so much. But I will end it with this question, and that is, how do you balance preserving the structure and materials of your work with wanting the reader, viewer, experiencer to interact with it? How do you consider how your book will be touched, read, and smelled? And I think that's a great question to end this on. So, uh, Julie, I'll start with you, and I'm just going based on the people I see, and then can call you to answer that, and we will wrap this up.
Before I answer that question, I wanted to just go back to the programming that we were talking about programming. And right now I'm getting ready to host a conference, a book art conference for CBAA. We used to be known as the College Book Art Association, and you can find our website, collegebookart.org, but we're now known just as CBAA. And that conference will be here in Madison, Wisconsin, June 5 through 7, 2025. And we're an organization that focuses on the teaching and learning of book art, mostly at the college level, but at all levels. And so the call for papers and the call for the exhibition are open now until December 1st. So I hope to see a lot of you there. Please consider not only just attending the conference, but speaking at the conference or exhibiting your work at the conference. But getting back to the question about considering how a book is interacted with, I make a lot of models. So it's really important for me as I'm designing the book that it can be handled and it can withstand handling. So I go through a series of maybe 10 different models that where I'm trying to make sure the structure works well. I'm trying to make sure the materials stand up and all that stuff. But I'm making additions. So I really in investing in that front end kind of R&D is really it works out for me, and it's important because then if I'm going to make 30, I don't want to get people sending them back saying they broke. So so I really do spend a lot of time thinking about that and working out the kinks to get it to so that people can handle the work.
For me, form follows function also. I'm always thinking about the function of the book. And mine are made from clothing, which we wear. So if you can wear it and it survived the wear, then it can survive the touch. But I do a lot of couture type of things on the background of the fabric so that they can stand up tall, stand up straight. They won't, because fabrics have inherent vices. So I make sure that the ones I use don't have too many inherent vices. So I don't use a lot of silks. If I do use silk, it's a silk type of blend, but I like cottons. I like, fabrics that will last a long time. I do look for that. And I do test them. And I've seen them tested over the years. So I'm very mindful of that because I do want people to touch them, to feel them, to smell them.
For me, I also make models, but not full models. I'll make models of aspects of the work. And because pretty much each time I work on a project, it's completely different. I have to learn so many new processes. For this one in particular, the scent aspect, I'm not, scent is not my normal thing. So I had to educate myself, take some classes, figure out, well, how am I going to make this scent so that it can last for many, many, many decades? How can I put it in a vessel? What type of vessel to put it in to where it will not degrade? And how can I fill the vessel with the scent in a way that it doesn't spill out, doesn't cause any damage to itself or anything surrounding it? So there were a lot of things that I had to do some reading and experiments on, as well as a couple of consultations with people who were in this, scent is their thing, and I was able to run it by someone in particular at a place called the Institute of Art and Olfaction. And Saskia Wilson Brown, I'm just going to give her a shout out for for encouraging me to go on with the project and for pointing me in directions as far as how do I make this a scent that can make this scent stable, something that can last. So anyway, that's how, those are some of the things that I did with this particular project.
My piece was kind of created in that the structure that people would be able to open it and close it and kind of look inside and look all around it. So on how it would be touched and everything like that, I want them to like play with it and be able to, interact with it as much as they can. And me as an artist, I personally really like to be able to keep working on the project. So I really want to keep working on this structure and want to keep working on this book um, as much as I need to. And then it'll be different every time, obviously, someone experiences it because of those changes. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure to work and collaborate with all of you on this year. It's been a year, can you believe it, of this exhibition, and so wonderful to hear your thoughts about your work. I'm seeing like other people that I want to shout out in the chat. So I'm going to shout out Codex Foundation and Print Matter and other places, the Center for Book Arts, just places that are really highlighting artist books and book arts and doing programming related to it. And absolutely, my goals are to do more and more programming related to book arts and doing what we've talked about here and connecting that to the public and letting them know that this is artwork. And their works on paper. So I just want to thank you for this really, really great discussion, and thank you for this really great exhibition. And I think we'll end it there. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Hope this was
Thank you.
enjoyed our conversation, and we hope to see you at future programming, virtual or in person, at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.